Hey, what's up, you guys? This is Eric with OzoneTCG. Today we have OzoneTCG team member Griffin. He got top 8 at a regional. And Griffin, how was your experience at the regional?
I was pretty good. I mean, as you can see right here, I played Despia, relatively standard build of Despia from what people are moving to at the moment. Although I chose to move away from the more gas build, the one that's trying to focus more on the generics, because I feel like with the current state of the format and the way people are building for Despia, I think this is the correct type of build to bring to an event.
Okay, yeah, let's get on right into the main deck then. So start off with the first, the one ad libitum.
Standard.
Pretty standard. Same with the one Albion. What was the reason for just the one Albion? Was it for the mirror dumping Branded opening?
It was mainly just to test things out. To play, I wanted another allure target because I put Albion in before I put the crows in. I had I believe only 13 darks, no, 12 darks before I decided to put in the Albion. So I was thinking that. I was thinking a way to make Branded and Red live on my first turn by dumping Albaz. On the whole, though, Albion was really not. I think if you're not playing the Lost package, which I'll explain later why I don't think you should play the Lost package, but I think if you're not, then playing Albion it doesn't really do much by itself. In the future, I would absolutely cut Albion most likely.
Okay. And then the 3 Aliber, standard.
Standard.
3 Ash, it's also standard. Negating Branded Fusion is huge and just good card. 3 DD Crow, I assume this is for the mirror.
The mirror, just because I think it's one of the best generic hand traps out there at the moment, just because it's not a silver bullet against any one deck, but it hits pretty much every deck in game one. Like, even if you're siding it out most of the time, it's better to have something that's good generically into the field than try and pick from an array of silver bullets that are going to be dead against 60% of decks that you'll face. In the future, I would possibly play Valor instead, but Crow does have the utility of being an allure target if you're still on the allure build.
Okay. Yeah, and it's still a monster that we use for Guardian Chimera too. So why a lot of Branded players are playing Valor instead of something like Impermanence, just in case you need to fuse it off. And then the triple Thespian Tragedy. Usually people play 2. What was your reasoning for playing 3?
Same thing with the fact that I'm playing allure. I think, though, I do not particularly like Mercarier. I think it generally makes your deck worse. And I think if you're not playing Mercarier, there's no real reason to play triple lure anymore, as I kind of found at the regional. So in the future, I think Tragedy is something that you would cut to 2. Yes.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. And then triple Edge Imp. Some people play 2, some people play 3. I assume just another allure target for playing 3.
Yeah, another one that I could see myself cutting to 2 in the future.
Okay. Yeah, and then the 1 Snow for Albion. That's
Standard, yeah.
Card's really good. And then double Albaz. What was the reason for not playing the third Albaz? It's also kind of a newer trend.
You don't really. I mean, you're never really going to be hurting for a third Albaz in deck in the late game against the majority of decks, because most of the other decks you're going to be facing in the current field tend to blow their wad very quickly. And so the fact that you may not have a third Albaz in the deck in the late game generally won't matter, because if you reach the late game against Punk Therion, if you've managed to keep Discoliseum off the field, or against Dragon Link, you're most likely in a winning position anyways. So I think on the whole, playing a third Albaz only really contributes to having more brick hands in general if you're not on Super Poly in the main deck at the moment, which I don't think you should be with how Despia is falling out of favor.
Okay. Gotcha. And then triple lure, standard. Triple Branded Fusion, also standard. Triple Branded Red. Some people, again, go from 2 to 3. How did 3 play for you?
I think it's just a very solid thing to have in the grind game, as well as the opportunity sometimes to use Branded and Red on your first turn to set up a double Masquerade board, or something like Dragostapelia, Mirror Jade, and a Masquerade or something. It's good to have the third red in general, especially if you're playing Banishment, so that you have access to red, enabling you to set Banishment, because red is simply, in my opinion, the better of the 2 cards.
Okay. Gotcha. Triple Branded Opening, standard Call by the Grave, also standard for negating Ash. How did Double Droplet perform? Usually it's a 3 or 0. Yeah, how did the 2 play?
Admittedly, it would have been a 3 of if I could have gotten my hands on the third.
No, there we go.
But just at 2, it put in pretty solid work.
Okay.
If I can find a third, I will play a third in the future. If I can't, I will continue to play 2. It's that simple. It's a very good card to have in your main deck.
All right, yeah, fair enough. And then double patchwork. Again, some people play 3. Was there like a specific reason for playing just the 2, or was it not finding a third?
It's not really a starter card. It's not a monster for Guardian Chimera or Lure of Darkness. And there's the simple fact that you can't resolve the third in general. I know the discourse around not playing 3 of a card because you won't be able to resolve a third, but you will genuinely often get to that third patchwork in this deck because you resolve chains so quickly. And I find it better just to not have dead cards clogging up the hand if at all possible, because Despia manages to see so many of its cards, especially so many of its searchables.
Okay, gotcha. And then double polymerization, pretty standard with this. And then how did Branded Banishment end up in the main? You think it was a good choice to play in the main, or would you rather have put it in the side?
It's a weird card because it doesn't really seem to put in work that often, because you're generally going to prioritize Branded in red, if anything. And you have to make it work, you have to have multiple Despias in gray. By the time that you can reliably set up Banishment, you should generally be winning most games, because you've already gone through at least a turn or two. And against most of the decks in the field, if Despia's gone through a couple turns and still has a loaded grave, you're most likely winning already anyways.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, moving forward, do you think you would move it to the side or just not play it at all?
It depends, because there's so many good options on the side, and also it would depend on the siding patterns, because Despia I find has very strange siding patterns. A lot of the time you're siding out 2s or 5s or 4s a lot of the time rather than simple 3s.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Alrighty, to the extra deck. So pretty standard extra deck. I see maybe 1 or 2 cards that some people play, some people don't play. Triple Albion, I think this is standard now. Card's really good.
No, if you're on
summoning.
If you're on Snow, you have to be on 3 Albion.
Yeah. And it's just good to still summon anyway, even if you're not using the graveyard effect, just because it gets you to all of your other fusions. Proskenion, how did this card play? A lot of people have dropped this since then.
It does play really well with Banishment. That's the only time I can really see you summoning Proskenion is either off Banishment or off Super Poly in the Mirror, in which case it's good. Otherwise, it's sort of just a space, but the problem with Despia is there aren't really that... I genuinely don't think there's that many, great options in the extra deck beyond the first 10 or 12. You're sort of just, looking for things that you might summon at some point to fill it out. And Proskenion, you won't summon it very often, but it's good to have on the off chance that you do get the chance to summon it. So I think it's worth including, because there's nothing better.
Okay, fair enough. And then Queritus, Super Poly for Sword Soul, pretty standard. Double Chimera standard. Rebellion standard. Masquerade standard. Mirror Jade standard. Dragostapelia also standard. How did Titaniclad perform? Did you summon it at all, or was it just for Mirror Jade?
Mostly just another thing to send off Mirror Jade once all of the Albions are used, or in case someone dropped an Arrival Ignister on me and didn't know how to use Danmari. But I didn't end up summoning it all. I only sent it off Mirror Jade once all day. It's there for lack of anything better, really. Okay. I could play Sprint or Brigron, but I'm not on Kit or Mercarier, so I felt that the off chance of Titaniclad coming up with Nibiru in the side made it more useful than one of the other two.
Okay, fair enough. Would you change anything moving forward in the extra deck, just from your experience with this regional?
Not really, because I think 13 of the 15 are pretty clearly set. So yeah, Titaniclad and Proskenion are the only really flex spots at the moment. I genuinely don't think there's anything better, even if they're not that great by themselves.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Alrighty, side deck, pretty straightforward. I love seeing the 1s and 3s. I hate the 2s on the side. Necro World Banshee will put this over. With Zombie World, obviously Force Flu Unrees. Did you ever side this in versus Sword Soul? If you played any?
No, I only played against one sword somehow all day, and it never came in because I ended up I took game one, then I ended up 2-0ing.
Oh, okay. Alrighty. And then Nibiru, how did this perform at all if you decided it in?
Quite well because I think like even against adventurer combo decks, I still think Nibiru is a good thing to bring in against them because if they don't have the adventurer engine, obviously they are likely going to have to set themselves up in a way that's susceptible to Nibiru. And even if they do have adventurer engine, if you can drop it on, say when they have Zeamin and Griffin on the field, Griffin is still forced, and then they have to like scramble for a new line to be able to like play through it. So I think even just taking a single negate out of their end board makes it still worth it to include.
Okay. Yeah. I think I agree. At least it forces them to trade 1-for-1s. I don't think it's bad in that case at all.
If you're trading 1-for-1s in Despia against most of the combo field, certainly you're going to come out ahead in the long run because of the way the deck just accrues advantage so well, and because of the way it's just very well set up for the grind game. You don't want to be doing it against something like Striker, obviously, but if you're bringing Nibiru against Striker, then I don't know what to tell you.
Fair enough, yeah. Now, how did Cosmic perform? Some people were playing Twin Twisters for the synergy with Edge of Chain, or maybe like Thespian Tragedy, Chain, Branded Red. How did Cosmic perform through your regional?
Decently well. I mean, it comes in really... I hate that I have to bring it in sometimes going first even because of the threat of mine, but mine seems to be dying off a bit just because Despia itself is falling out of favor. So it mostly just comes in against projected anti-spells, but realistically, most people that aren't on Sword seem to be siding D-Barrier at the moment, so it mostly just comes in against back row decks. Like actual back row decks, not Sword.
No. Alright, fair enough, yeah. Would you change going forward, or would you just keep playing Cosmic?
I like Cosmic. In general, you're generally going to have 1,000 life points more than you're going to have a card that you necessarily want to discard. I think if you're siding in and going second, which you most of the time will be, then you'll generally want the other 5 for breaking the board.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. And then speaking of breaking board, Super Poly, standard 2.
Only against Despia, yeah.
Yeah, kind of have to play it. How did D-Barrier perform?
I honestly think you can get away without siding things in going first a lot of the time. It's like, would you side it in going first? Against Sword, certainly. Against Despia, I honestly think you'd rather have Super Poly a lot of the time, but I don't know. D-Barrier is a weird card. I feel like you have to play it just because of the way it skips turns against Sword and Despia, but it's hard to find space for it because the question isn't what are you going to side in. The question is what can you side out without it harming your engine.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I'm not sure. With Marincess being kind of a newer deck with the new support in duels from the deep, do you think this card will fall out of favor at all, or do you think it'll be still as strong as it is now?
I'm going to be honest with you, I can't see Marincess having that much of a metagame presence. It's an enjoyable deck, certainly, but it's too fragile, too susceptible to hand traps, too linear. I can't see it peaking above tier 3, maybe tier... No, most likely not tier 2.
Okay, fair enough, alright. And then, of course, Red Reboot. Did you see this card at all during the event?
I drew into it after Anti-Spell had already been flipped on me once. That was fun. But it's such a dreadful card to have because obviously you have to play it, otherwise you just straight up lose to D-Barrier half the time. But you're not going to draw it. That's the thing. You're not going to draw it. And so it feels so bad to have it eating up a side, having it eating up a side slot. And then the off chance that it ever does get dropped on you, you feel so awful to have suffered that. They should, realistically, of all the cards you're seeing on the screen right now, that's the one that should be banned more than anything else. Okay, maybe I wouldn't say the same if I had mine in life 70, but I would think about it.
Okay. Would you play mine moving forward, or do you think Despia should play mine at all?
I thought about it for a bit, but I think Despia players are like most other decks are well suited to handle it, and even against Despia, I'd rather. Yes, it's an auto win against them. Maybe, actually, maybe. I like Super Poly, but just because you like something doesn't mean you should be wedded to it forever. I liked Cross Out for the mirror as well, and you'll see that that wasn't in my 70.
That's fair enough. Now, speaking of moving forward, do you think the main deck should change, or what do you think should change with Despia builds in general moving forward?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I don't like the Lost package, and it's a subsection of what I think is wrong with current Despia, which is that like people have been playing the all gas builds with the Lost package, with Dramaturge, with Theater, and in my opinion, these don't really or they don't really play to Despia's strengths and the strengths within the context of the current meta. Like, yes, you can build a very strong going first four with Despia if you can end on something like Double Masquerade, Dramaturge, Mirror Jade, Dragos Pelia, Branded Red set, but it's not as consistent, not as commonly, you're not as commonly able to do it as you are with something with like Adventure Punk Therion or Dragon Link. You're basically playing a worse version of the more efficient combo decks that are out there, and you're sacrificing pretty much all your ability to play into boards to go second to do it, because you can't really play hand traps, you can't really play droplets if you want to play the all gas build. You're already going up to like 44 or 45 cards in most builds that we've seen, and you're playing a lot of cards that don't really do anything on their own. Like Theater doesn't really do anything on its own. Dramaturge needs other cards to make it good. The Lost package is like it's a bunch of things that don't really synergize on their own with the deck. They need a bunch of other support to make them good. If you've just drawn a lot of things that I would say win more. I would say win more is the best way to describe the Gas Despia build at the moment. And then there's the fact that, well, Mystic Mine is a card. There are a lot of silver bullets that absolutely wreck the gas build, whereas something like this, it's lower power certainly, but I think it's better in general all around. Like Gas Despia was better suited when we thought Despia was the only like real deck, but I don't think Despia is the best deck at the moment, I'll be honest. I think most likely it's some sort of adventure punk build, and I think Dragon Link is underrated as well. And if you're going up against these, you can't rely on winning the die roll as a Gas Despia player and hoping to high roll into a board that's still inferior to what they can probably punch through anyways.
Right, especially Punk Therion with Calamity still being able to play around certain chains. Sometimes it can play through Droplet, but otherwise it's really hard to play through their own board going second. So I think I agree from there. And speaking of playing into strengths, do you think the Predaplant version of the deck plays into Despia's strengths at all, or do you think it's just objectively worse because it's more combo oriented with a fusion toolbox kind of deck?
It seems just more powerful on the first turn at least, but the grind doesn't seem to be as strong. If you want to play a deck that plays well still on turn 5 and 7, then I think pure Despia is the better way to go. You can fit about a similar amount of generics in either build, but Predaplant it's much more fragile. It's much more susceptible to hand traps. There were multiple times when I played through like 1 or 2 hand traps, still managed to establish like a Mirror Jade and pass, which is a respectable enough board. I feel like I haven't got that much experience with the Predaplant build, admittedly, but it seems to me from discussions with Predaplant players that if you've been hand trapped twice, you're most likely passing, and you're most likely losing the next turn.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of which, what were your regional opponents? What were they playing? What did you win against? What did you lose against? And ties.
Let's see. We lost to a Punk Therion build.
Okay.
realistically, I should have won. It was my own misplays that did me in. We drew against Adventurer Virtual World, which I won't lie, I had to read all of his cards because it's been so long since I've seen what any of the virtual worlds do. And then we beat the Mirror, we beat Steny Sword, a couple of Adventurer Punkthyrion, Adventurer Synchro, uh, one other deck that I don't remember off the top of my head. So it was like a pretty diverse field, although mostly combo. I was thankful to have missed any Eldritch or any Striker, but I think on the whole, those decks aren't very well suited into the current field. It's because like Punkthyrion or Dragon Link just sort of plow through the average Striker or Eldritch board, and Mystic Mine isn't really that much of a threat to them on the whole, it seems.
Okay, yeah. How do you think this deck would have paired against Fluwandereeze?
I try not to think about Fluwandereeze in general. It makes me sad. I think most likely the same. What usually happens, you lose game one if you've lost the die roll, and then it comes down to whether the Flunder player draws their side games 2 and 3, because obviously your side is easily accessible if you've drawn any of your engine in this deck, and can they break the zombie world?
No, fair enough. Alrighty. Did you have any other suggestions for Despia players moving forward and into the NAWCQ?
Yes, I wanted to give like anyone who sees this build and wants to like copy what I did, absolutely should not, because the general theory behind what I played is solid. I stand by that, but the specific card choices that I made were I will admit they need a lot of work. The side could have been a lot better. There's things like, as you brought up with Mystic Mine for Despia possibly being better than Super Poly. The ratios are untried. There's a lot of cards that I mentioned in the main that I didn't really like. So when I go to UK Nationals in a week's time, I'm going to be playing a very, very different build of Despia. But I do think when it comes to a deck that you're playing to try give you the best chance of topping, I think Despia is one of the best contenders out there. I think it's got one of the best engines all around. It can fit a decent number of generics if you aren't playing the gas build. It plays well into pretty much everything in the format that isn't named Mystic Mine. I think Despia should be still one of the most solid decks going forwards. It's just the builds need to be changed from how they've been played, because it's currently, as a lot of people are playing Despia, it seems to be inferior against the decks with higher ceilings, because it's trying to match them with their own game, and it can't do that consistently enough.
Okay, fair enough. And I have one last question. What do you think about Dark Rule or No More in the side deck for this deck? Would you consider that if you think Punkthyrion is the best deck? Or would you just say, hey, I'd rather play something like Mystic Mine?
It's not something that I had particularly considered. Generally, on the whole, I do prefer to play hand traps or cards like Droplet that are more versatile, because I'm sure you've heard the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and if I can stop the board from ever being made, or at least mollify what it'll be made into, that's better than trying to play through what they've already got.
Okay, yeah, I think I agree. Specifically with this deck, yeah. Alrighty. Did you have any other notes that you had or experiences from the regional?
It's good to be, I'm sure everyone knows since we've had events for a while now, just expressing my joy at being able to play the physical card game again.
Yeah, that's fair. Alrighty, guys. This is Griffin with OzoneTCG, Eric with OzoneTCG. Thank you for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.